Hi, and welcome to another edition of Social News Interviews. I'll be your host today, E-Rock Christopher. And in today's episode, we'd like to discuss the recent and alarming increasing trend of Canadians who are seeking bankruptcy help and credit counseling services. As a matter of fact, it's been brought to our attention that demand for these services has increased significantly over the last couple of years. So we decided to reach out to a certified credit counselor, someone who's been helping people for literally 20 plus years to help them with their debt obligations, bankruptcy, and credit counseling. So we'd like to welcome to today's episode a certified BIA credit counselor, none other than Avneet Khalsi. Avneet, welcome to today's episode.
Thank you, Rock. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Excellent. So, Avneet, please share with our Canadian audience why you have these concerns over the recent increase in trend for Canadians seeking help with bankruptcy, with credit counseling services, and maybe you can address a little bit about what's going on in the Canadian economy. And as well, isn't that a little bit good for your business? Why would this be cause of concern for you?
That's a great question, Iraq. As you said, in the recent past, the financial sector, the financial situation overall in North America has drastically changed compared to the previous decades. That is due to various contributing factors. One of them primarily being low interest rates. Historically, this is the lowest interest rates have ever been available to consumers. And I believe, in my opinion, that's been one of the main driving factors where consumers have borrowed more than their means and have extended themselves more than they can handle. And part of the reason why all of this is affecting the consumers overall.
Well, it's very interesting. So Avneet is a certified BIA credit counselor who currently works with business solutions and credit counseling services in Canada. And so tell us, Avneet, what inspired you? Tell us a little bit more about your story, your company's background, and honestly, what inspired you to be a certified credit counselor?
Well, Iraq, initially I was going to school for computers. I was not in the financial industry. However, I came across this industry as my father had been doing credit counseling for many years, based out of Ontario, Toronto. I joined the business shortly after finishing school and realized that this is something that interests me greatly, as it is not only being able to have an honest earning, but also being able to give back, where you can really make a change in one's life by putting them on the right track financially, or when they're in distress in their life.
Well, fantastic. And so, do you recall any time during that process? I mean, you were obviously intrigued by that whole IT industry. Was there any kind of like epiphany or a moment of inspiration that you might have had that caused you to make that leap, like a specific example?
Yes, Iraq. I recall when I initially joined the firm, I started shadowing my father, and went through and witnessed a whole different side of the industry where I didn't realize that how much of an impact the financial hardship can have on one's life, where it can affect your day-to-day lifestyle. That can include your marital affairs, that could include your family life, your kids, your work, and your overall demeanor as a person. So I've been fortunate enough, and I should say been able to witness some unfortunate situations as well, where one of the things I recall, one of the scenarios I recall initially when I joined the business was this single mother who came into our office to discuss her financial situation. As she was going on, and as the meeting continued, she had an emotional breakdown, and I vividly remember that moment when she broke down on our table and kind of spilled the beans, stating that no, this is the end for my life. At that moment, I had a bit of a epiphany where this is what I wanted to do. I really wanted to help people. If I can put somebody on the right path and make a real life-changing impact on them, I believe I was at the right place. And that's what really ultimately made me decide that, I like to do this as a career.
Well, awesome, Avni. It's so glad to hear that you as a certified credit counselor are inspired to actually help people and making a positive difference in their lives. Which leads me to our next question, Avni, is a lot of Canadians and basically people across the world are always looking to do business with companies that they can align values with, that they know have, good, social awareness, things of that nature. And so you working as a credit counselor at Business Solutions and Credit Counseling Services, what are your company's values?
Well, that's a great question, Iraq. Some of the values that, the core values that we hold as a company, as individuals, is giving education to our clients, giving honest and professional advice, along with having integrity as to who we are, where we're coming from, and what we're advising our clients, being consistent with it. So, just to elaborate on this. For example, the education element I mentioned, I find that there's a real lack of knowledge in general consumers, when it comes to budgeting, when it comes to just writing down their day-to-day expenses, and seeing how they can better their finances by actually putting it down on a piece of paper and doing the math on the numbers. So that's something basic that everybody can do, and I do find that people come into our office, how often they have never done that in their lives, which is astonishing to me, as I would feel that would be the first step. Again, being honest and giving professional advice is one of the big facts that I thrive on, or I take pride in, because we've been around for many years, and for that very reason, as we've been able to guide and give the right advice to people over the last couple of decades.
Well, fantastic, Avni. That's amazing that your company is obviously being able to espouse the values that you believe will help increase the likelihood of you helping your customers who might need credit counseling services. And so we did a little bit of research, Avni, and we discovered, according to your website, that Business Solutions and Credit Counseling Services has been around for over 20 years now and has literally helped tens of thousands of clients with their financial and debt obligations. And so during that period of time, do you recall any memorable success stories of how you were able to really help people out of their difficulties?
Yes, Iraq, I recall many stories over the years that we've been able to successfully help people get their lives back on track when it comes to finances. Just to share a couple off the top of my head, I recall not too long ago we had assisted a young family, a gentleman with a spouse and a young kid at home. They had gone through some hardship where the gentleman had lost his job. He wasn't able to sustain his monthly expenses. So all said and done, at the end of the day, when he went through the process and he got himself completely debt-free, he came to my office a year later, and he was very thankful, and he was very grateful the fact that how his life has really turned around. Initially, he was contemplating even if he should go through the process or should he contact a professional like ourselves. However, the feedback I received after a number of years was that was one of the most important and the most valuable calls that he had ever made when he picked up the phone and called our office. So I was quite pleased to hear that. There are other stories like that. I've come across single parents, single mothers struggling and trying to make ends meet. At the same time, they've accumulated consumer debt over the years, just trying to sustain their lifestyle. And so in scenarios like that, I really like to not only find a solution for their debt problem at this given moment, I also like to look at the bigger picture as to what changes need to be made for this individual so they can better their life in the future and avoid from ever coming down to this position ever again.
Well, awesome. So thank you for sharing those success stories. Curious to know, though, obviously you probably get peoples of all walks of life, having helped tens of thousands of people over the last couple of decades. But one particular segment is of interest, being that entrepreneurs typically end up taking lots of risks in the business world. Do you remember any successful stories of how you were able to help entrepreneurs navigate their challenges with financial difficulty?
Certainly, Iraq. I can recall a scenario where a young gentleman, he's an entrepreneur. He started his own business, got self-employed. However, because this was his very first company, he wasn't quite sure as to how to structure the company, how he should file his taxes, what is the best way of having some tax savings. So once we sat down, we evaluated where he is at the moment and what other things he could do to better himself. One of those main points that we had hit was that he'd have to restructure his company and do the tax structuring in such a way where he doesn't end up in a predicament where he owes backdated taxes or he owes other debts to other suppliers. So we sat down and we drew a business plan for him. Not only that included taking care of his existing issues that we were facing, also making some drastic changes where he can avoid from running into this kind of predicament again. So that's one of the stories that I can recall, getting a person back on track.
Well, fantastic. So thank you for sharing some of those success stories when it comes to helping Canadians with their bankruptcy help and credit counseling issues. One of the things that I'm going to do, Avani, is I'm going to put you in the hot seat here a little bit. A lot of entrepreneurs and business owners love to discuss the success stories, but aren't always willing to share in any mistakes or lessons that they might have learned, and being transparent about their background and what's helped them to learn to where they are to be able to become successful today. So would you mind, Avani, sharing with our audience today some examples or an example of where maybe you didn't get the outcome that you particularly hoped for? And what did you learn from that?
Certainly, Iraq, I recall a situation where an elderly gentleman came into our office with his wife. These folks had very limited resources. They had limited pension income coming in. However, their expenditure was much higher than their total take-home income. So, this is one of those scenarios where I came across to realize that giving the honest, upfront advice to the individual is better than me sugarcoating it or saying things that they may want to hear from me. So I went in the opposite direction where I really laid it out for them, indicating that they're living way above their means and they need to make a change, including possibly selling their family asset, their principal residence, which was very uncomfortable, for the individual to hear, because here I am asking him to sell his main house where he lives in and downsize and come into something more affordable. So one of the great lessons I learned out of that scenario was, regardless of how uncomfortable that advice or that scenario might be for the person, just give it as is, and hopefully they can grab onto it and learn a thing or so and better themselves.
Awesome. So if you're just joining us here today, you're watching another edition of Social News Interviews, and we're talking here with Avani Kalsi, a certified BIA credit counselor who works at Business Solutions and Credit Counseling Services. So Avani, obviously you're helping Canadians with their issues with debt relief and financial difficulties. Would you mind sharing with our Canadian viewers who might be an ideal candidate for your services?
That's a great question, Iraq. We provide services to all walks of life. That can consist of an age group from anywhere from 25 all the way up to 70 years old. The clients that we get into our office, people who are calling our offices for services or just getting information, they can have an extremely horrible financial situation to just seeking advice or being proactive, trying to avoid any dilemmas that they may see arise in the near future. So we help people who have gotten themselves into substantial consumer debt that can consist of credit card debts, high interest cards, department store cards, which are also very high interest, lines of credits, any personal loans, and the consumer debts, any government owing taxes, GST, payroll, or personal taxes, income taxes, all of that would fall under the category where we can help people restructure and renegotiate the debt down to a level they can handle and make them afford the monthly payments and get them back on their financial feet again.
So Avani, as a certified BIA counselor, a lot of people are probably wondering, what is credit counseling? What does a credit counselor do? And does credit counseling work? I mean, can you give us some insights for those that might not be educated with this side of the financial world?
That's a great question, Iraq. So credit counseling is a general term used in the financial industry when anybody who has run into any sort of financial hardship or come across a scenario where they're not able to manage their own finances. So under the credit counseling term, there's other categories that would fall that can include bankruptcies, filing a personal or a corporate bankruptcy. That could also include filing a consumer proposal, restructuring your debts, making informal proposals to your creditors. So there's a wide variety of things that would come under the credit counseling term.
Awesome. So Avani, obviously credit counseling services are important to people, and a lot of people, based on our research, don't necessarily know if credit counseling services can help them solve their problems. So one of the questions that people typically seem to be looking for, as an example, would be do credit counseling services help with or stop wage garnishment?
That's an excellent question, Iraq. Credit counseling, yes, can stop wage garnishment. That depends on the individual's process, what they get themselves into in terms of filing either a consumer proposal or a bankruptcy, as those two terms would allow that individual to have a stay of proceedings, which will essentially stop any legal actions against the person or the corporation. So yes, credit counseling, once an individual gets into one of those scenarios, can certainly stop their wage garnishments.
And what about lawsuits, Avani? Can credit counseling help individuals who are facing a lawsuit and to help them stop a potential lawsuit?
Yes, Iraq, again, same thing. Any individual who goes through the legal system of getting protection against their creditors would allow them to stop any lawsuits against them or their company.
And then obviously a lot of people can get into financial difficulty as a result of payday loans, student loans, car loans. Can credit counseling help people with these issues? Again, car loans, payday loans, student loans.
Again, that's an excellent question. Yes, credit counseling can help people resolve majority of these type of loans that you mentioned. There's a small difference between credit card debts and a vehicle loan, as a vehicle loan would be considered as a secured loan versus a credit card or a personal loan is considered as an unsecured loan. Primary difference is if you've got a secured loan, generally the creditor holds some sort of security, some sort of collateral down from the individual. In the event they default on the commitment to pay back the full amount, the creditor has the right to exercise to go ahead and obtain that piece of asset, that could be a vehicle or any other asset, and liquidate it to recuperate some of their losses.
And what about medical bills, Avani? Can credit counseling help people with their medical bills?
Yes, Iraq, absolutely. Medical bills would also be considered as an unsecured debt. And as I mentioned earlier, any unsecured debt can be covered under credit counseling.
And then one of the big questions that I would imagine that many Canadian homeowners would be concerned about is, can credit counseling help people with foreclosure?
That's an excellent question, Iraq. Foreclosure is a little bit different, as I mentioned, with the scenario of a vehicle loan, This is similar to a vehicle loan, as this is also considered as a secured loan. Any mortgages or any lines of credit is locked to an asset, to a house. So if an individual gets into a foreclosure situation where they're not able to keep up their payments, the banks generally give multiple options. That could include with giving the person some time to come up with the funds to bring up the areas up to date. One of the options could be given is also to be able to sell the asset, have the ability to sell it in the today's market value and recuperate some funds back and pay the creditors back. In general, if an individual has had a foreclosure, they were not able to fulfill their commitment to the creditor, paying back the full amount, and the creditor has gone through a sale of their asset. If there's any shortfall of that loan after the asset has been sold, that shortfall could be considered as an unsecured debt and could be included in the credit counseling at a later date when that person addresses it.
So Avani, some of our Canadian viewers who may not have already be homeowners but are looking to buy a home are wondering, is it possible to get a home loan while in the credit counseling process? I mean, is it possible to obtain a mortgage when going through credit counseling?
That's an excellent question, Iraq. The answer is yes. In general, the creditors, before they give the person any further lending or they qualify them for any further lending, they would request the individual to go ahead and pay off their existing credit counseling loan or their consumer proposal or whatever that person might be going through before the lender will go ahead and lend again. But yes, you can certainly obtain that.
Awesome. Well, that's interesting to know, and I'm sure that Canadians will be glad to know that it is still a potential viable option. So Avani, you're a certified BIA credit counselor with business solutions and credit counseling services, and you've been able to help literally tens of thousands of people over the last 2+ decades with their financial troubles and issues. And so during that time, Avani, has your company won any sort of awards, designations, things of that nature? And also, obviously, you're a certified credit counselor. Are all the counselors at your firm certified?
That's a great question, Iraq. To answer the second part of your question, yes, all our counselors are BI certified. So everyone holds credentials in our firm where we're able to help people and give advice under the legal structure. Having said that, in terms of any awards or any other sort of recognitions, we have received, various types of appreciations in various capacities, Iraq. I really like to think of ourselves, our success is not receiving awards that I can, or a plaque that I can put on my desk. I like to think the real reward for our company or for us is the feedback, the positive feedback that we get from our clients, and the real life-changing, contribution that we're able to make for these people. That can include, with a person coming back after they've gone through the process through our office with a small box of sweets as a token of appreciation. So, when I come across scenarios like that, that's what I feel, Iraq, that I am really rewarded, and that's the real award for me and my company. When I see people with a big smile on their face and thanking us and giving us hope and telling us that they are keeping us in their prayers because we were so successful in putting them back on their financial track again. So to me, that's the real rewarding part, Eric.
Well, awesome, Avani. And that's an interesting perspective, that the accolades and the feedback and the positive sentiments that you get from your customers and clients are far more important than any perhaps prestigious awards. So again, if you're just joining us, we're here today with certified BIA credit counselor Avani Kalsi, who works with business solutions and credit counseling services. And so people who are going through credit challenges or financial difficulties, Avani, they may not know what kind of help that they really need. And so if someone were to want to learn more about your company and they wanted to know what kind of services that you offer, can you help our audience and Canadians to understand the different and various services and options that you can provide them help with?
Absolutely, Iraq. I would love to elaborate as to what services we provide. We are a full-fledged credit counseling firm across the nation. We're across Canada, where we've got offices in most of the provinces from east to west. We're able to help people who are facing any sort of financial hardship or being able to get their financial life back on track. That could, include from extreme cases where an individual needs to file for a personal or a corporate bankruptcy to get their lives back on track, or to not so extreme where individual has one or two collection accounts and they just want to be able to deal with that, get those collection items off of their credit bureau, and being able to move on in life. So, we get people from all walks of life, all spectrum, from high-end debt load to, nominal debt loads.
Amazing. So thank you for sharing that, Avani. And so what would you say is a better option for someone who's trying to resolve their financial difficulties? Consumer proposal versus bankruptcy. Which of these options do you find tends to help people with that relief?
That's a wonderful question, Iraq, and that is a common question that I guess I get asked all the time in our office here. The best way to evaluate what would be the best option for the individual would be reviewing their finances and their earning power and their ability to pay back. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to. If an individual is making minimum wage, living, paycheck to paycheck, and have no ability to save any funds, and they're just barely making ends meet, then perhaps filing a consumer proposal where the person gets involved over a lengthy period of time with a smaller monthly payment to pay back the creditors may not be a viable option, as that person does not have the ability to sustain a long-term payment plan. So in a scenario like that, perhaps the person may consider filing a personal bankruptcy, versus if a person is earning, they do have a full-time job, however, because of their other expenses, they're not able to keep up their full minimum obligations towards their creditors. In a scenario like that, they still are able to pay back some debt some payments back to the creditors. That would be an ideal scenario for a person to file a consumer proposal as compared to a bankruptcy.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that wisdom with our Canadian viewers, Avani. So with that being said, when it comes to credit counseling versus debt management, are those the same? I mean, really, what's the difference between credit counseling and debt management?
Again, a wonderful question, Iraq. Primary difference between a credit counseling and debt management programs is, in a credit counseling, the individual is able to negotiate their debt down by a certain percentage and being able to pay over a monthly term or a payment plan where the amount is not paid back in full. A debt management program generally is where the person is still paying back the full debt, 100% of the debt. However, they're paying back in a monthly payment plan. And oftentimes, the creditors may work with the debt management company to reduce the interest down. So in a credit counseling scenario, the person would make their monthly payments with no interest on it, on the remaining balance, versus debt management, you're still paying interest and you're paying majority of your debt back.
Awesome. And if you're just joining us here today, we're here with certified BIA credit counselor, Avani Kalsi. And so obviously when people get into financial difficulties, people might be looking for bankruptcy help. And so when it comes to Canadians, what happens when a person needs to file or is declaring bankruptcy in Canada? And honestly, can you share with our viewers a little bit more about how bankruptcy works in Canada?
That's a great question, Iraq. I would love to share the details on a bankruptcy. When anybody gets into a scenario where they're not able to fulfill their minimum obligations, they're not able to keep up with their bills and their monthly payments, they may want to consider filing for a personal bankruptcy. When an individual goes through a personal bankruptcy, it is a legal process that they have to go through, where they have certain duties that they have to fulfill that consist of paying the minimum obligation for the cost of the bankruptcy, along with making sure that they're able to report their monthly income for a minimum period of 9 months. And some of the other things that they'll have to fulfill, the duties that they would have to fulfill is attend 2 credit counseling sessions with a certified BIA counselor like myself. Along with that, they would also need to ensure that they complete their tax information and they provide all the other information that's required to obtain their discharge at the end of the 9 months. So it is a legal process, Iraq, and one must follow all the rules and all the required duties in order for them to be able to close a matter and move forward in life.
Well, very interesting, Avani. And so someone who might be evaluating bankruptcy as an option might find the various options a little bit confusing. I mean, there's chapters, what is Chapter 7 bankruptcy? What is Chapter 11 bankruptcy? What is Chapter 13 bankruptcy? I mean, these are the options that are more commonly known here in the United States. Are these options the same in Canada? I mean, what types of bankruptcy options are available to Canadians?
Again, that's an excellent question, Iraq. I get asked that question often. What is the primary difference between Chapter 7, 11, 13? As consumers, we've all heard those terms floating around. First off, I'd like to clarify, in Canada, we generally don't use those terms, Chapter 7, 11, and 13, as that's Chapter 11 of the Bankruptcy Code in U.S. in the United States. It specifically applies to United States only. Here we are, that same law is structured a little bit differently, and the name of it, in fact, is the BIA Act, which is the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act. So that's the first difference. Second difference is the term, different types of chapters 7, 11, 13. We have similar procedures and processes available in Canada. However, the terms are used differently for that. So for instance, we use 2 primary terms in Canada, bankruptcy being one of them, and filing a consumer proposal under the BIA Act being the second one. So in a Chapter 7, generally, when anybody goes through Chapter 7 in the U.S., they generally forfeit all their assets, they sell everything, liquidate it all, and pay back the creditors whatever they can. In a Chapter 11, oftentimes they're able to keep their assets and negotiate the debt down. In a Chapter 13, they're able to keep all their assets, and based on the value of the assets, they negotiate a payment plan with their creditors. So those are the subtle differences. Similarly, in the Canadian system, we either have a bankruptcy where an individual goes through restructuring their assets, either by liquidating them or refinancing them to pay the creditors back, or by forfeiting them. Versus in a consumer proposal, they're able to keep their assets and restructure their overall finances, where they're able to pay back the debt back to the creditors with no monthly interest on it. So those are the primary differences.
Amazing insights, Avani. And so as a certified credit counselor, you probably encounter, literally you've been doing this for 20 plus years as an organization as well. And so a lot of people can typically find themselves in personal, issues and their personal difficulties. But again, when it comes to entrepreneurs, they're willing to typically take more financial risks. Do you, at your company, Business Solutions and Credit Counseling Services, also offer bankruptcy services for entrepreneurs and small businesses?
Again, an excellent question, Iraq. Most definitely, we at Business Solutions and Credit Counseling Services, we offer a wide variety of services that can include servicing our corporate clients, entrepreneurs, new businesses who are just starting up and not able to sustain themselves, all the way to established businesses at a bigger scale, where they may run into a predicament, they need to restructure their finances again. On the other hand of the spectrum, we also help individuals who are either self-employed, running a sole proprietorship, running a business under their personal name. They've got some Revenue Canada debts. They've got some different variety of debts that consist of their company and their personal. We're able to help all those folks.
So Avani, obviously people are coming to you and very troubled, and I can only imagine very emotional times. It must be a very, very painful experience on some level for people to feel like they have to reach out for professional credit counseling help. And so people are evaluating options, and it may be hard to know which company that they might want to work with. And so for those that are trying to find a resolution, they're trying to find a company that they can trust and work with, what would you say to a person who's watching this right now who might be experiencing financial difficulty, and what would you tell them as far as what could a person expect to experience when working with business solutions and credit counseling services?
That's a great question, Iraq. One of the things that I like to, as a consumer, like to evaluate any company or any dealings that I may be getting involved in, is I go through a checklist in my mind. That consists of understanding who the person I am dealing with or the company organization I'm dealing with, how long they've been established for, how long they've been around, what kind of credentials does the person who I'm dealing with one-on-one hold, how much experience they have, what kind of track record they have, what kind of online reviews they have, and ultimately if they are willing to work under a contract type of situation, or is it just on a one-on-one basis? So those are some of the things that I like to go through in my mind before I deal with anyone. And I would urge any consumer who's getting themselves involved where they're requiring some help to get their finances back on track, they should also go through the same type of checklist, to determine the party or the organization you're about to deal with. Are they really legitimate enough? Are they really established enough where they can, help you and guide you in the right direction without giving you misleading information?
Awesome. So Avani, when it comes to people who are looking for credit counseling services, they don't know who they can really trust, who's going to be able to be there when they really need the help the most. And so one of the things I'd like to ask is, does Business Solutions and Credit Counseling Services offer any sort of guarantee?
That's a wonderful question, Iraq. Most definitely, we offer 100% unconditional money-back guarantee when it comes to our services. What that means is, specifically to elaborate, if we are able to take a file on our table and we're able to commit to an individual or a company that will be fulfilling their solution in a certain manner, for any given reason, if the end results are not what we're trying to accomplish, then, as I said, we do give 100% money back guarantee. Having said that, Iraq, in the last close to 2 decades that we've been around doing this, I must say perhaps it's a handful of individuals or companies that we may have run into that situation where we had to return their full funds back. As majority of our work that we take on board, we were able to fulfill our commitment and really give results that we're wanting.
So Avani, as a certified BIA credit counselor, you obviously have years of experience having helped tens of thousands of people with their financial difficulties. And a lot of times people are searching for help with credit counseling, bankruptcy help, and they're trying to become more educated about what their options are. And so you being an expert in the industry, a lot of times people don't know the right questions to even ask. And so as an insider inside the financial industry, what are some secret insights or maybe some questions that people should be asking, but they just simply don't know to ask?
Again, that's a great point, Iraq. Some of the things I like to point out to consumers is that when they initially get into a debt situation where they're not able to fulfill their commitments on a monthly basis, the creditors give you some time. Oftentimes, you can start by picking up the phone and having a direct conversation with the bank or the creditor or the lender who's lent you the money. By starting giving them the honest truth about your hardship, whatever the financial situation you may be going through. And you'll be surprised how often the creditors are willing to listen to you and give you a break on some of your payment terms. Having said that, not all creditors do that, Iraq. we have to keep in mind that the bank is in the business to make money. They lend money to people to make money on their money. So having said that, they don't oftentimes write off or reduce the amounts down just because the person is not able to pay back their full commitment. So the general gist of the delinquency is, if an individual is not able to pay their obligations for 90 days, the creditor has a right to cancel that account and for non-payment and assign it to a third-party collection agency for collections. Now, one of the things that I come across that often people don't know of, and this is one of those inside secrets, Iraq, is when an account goes into collections, the individual has 30 days from the day it was sent to the collections, 30 days to deal with that issue at hand without it being reported to your credit bureau. So, oftentimes people assume that if my account's gone into collections, my credit is already shot, it's already been reported negatively on my credit bureau, and I won't be able to get this off for quite some time. That's not accurate. Like I said, you have 30 days, initial 30 days to make contact with the agency, possibly settle that account, and if you do end up making some sort of arrangement and settling that account, it may not get reported to your credit bureau, so you may avoid further negative rating on your bureau. Having said that, you do need to keep in mind that if it's in a collection type of scenario, your credit has already been impacted because you had defaulted for 90 days, 3 consecutive months before the account was sent to a third party. So unfortunately, the impact is already there. But the idea is to reduce the damage for having a real negative impact on your bureau for long term. That's one of the scenarios. One of the other things that people need to know of is what type of company they're dealing with. If it's a credit counseling company, if it's a non-profit or profit for. As a consumer, you may not know what the company's mandate is. If they're really working for you, the debtor, the client, or are they working for the creditor? And oftentimes, the consumer may not know upfront. They may have some sort of backdoor deal with the creditor, getting some sort of kickback or some donations back for the nonprofit organizations, and on the front face, we would still carry on the nonprofit banner. So they are still profiting, however, it's structured a little bit differently. Ultimately it boils down to the consumer. Buyer beware. You need to do your own due diligence to see who you're dealing with, and is this the right firm for you.
So just to summarize what you just said, and make sure that our audience is understanding this, Avenine, is you're saying that it's possible that Canadians might see some sort of non-profit, free help with your credit counseling issues or your debt relief issues, and it could turn out that actually they're representing the creditors versus actually the client's best interests. Is that correct?
That's partially correct, Iraq. Just to clarify, they wouldn't necessarily represent the creditor. However, they certainly have the interest of the creditor when they're trying to negotiate the debt down. As either they have some sort of, like I said earlier, backdoor deal where they're getting some sort of donations from the creditors at a later date, or they have a direct dealings with the creditors, a direct understanding as to what percentage would really be paid back despite what they collect from the consumer. So the consumer may end up paying 100 cents on the dollar, however the creditor may 70 cents on the dollar. And that 30% spread is where the consumer needs to know where's that money going.
Well, fantastic for sharing those insights with our audience, Avenine. So, people are looking, in times of financial difficulty. Obviously they want to be able to know that they can hire a credit counseling professional or a firm that they know that they can trust. And so a lot of times people are looking for the best credit counseling services or the top-rated credit counseling firms. So as a certified expert in the industry, Avenine, what should people be evaluating when trying to select the best credit counseling services?
That's a great question, Iraq. Some of the things a consumer should look for when they're trying to retain a credit counseling firm is how long the company has been established for. Do they have physical offices, or are they operating out of some remote location? And also the credentials of the individuals you're dealing with. Are they certified under the government's programs, or is it something that they're just doing for the sake of doing it? So you, as a consumer, one should really evaluate the company who you're dealing with, their credentials, their online reviews. There's various ways to determine if an organization is legitimate, and if they've been around long enough, they're probably doing something right. That's why they've been able to do it for a number of decades. And that's a good way of evaluating any business, for that matter.
So if you're just joining us, we're here with certified BIA credit counselor Avani Kalsi, who works at Business Solutions and Credit Counseling Services. And so obviously, Avani, people are experiencing financial difficulties, troubling times. And so one of the factors, of course, when making this type of decision of which company that they're going to work with is the cost. So at your company, Business Solutions and Credit Counseling Services, what is it typically, or maybe just as an industry, what does it typically cost for credit counseling services in Canada?
That's a great question, Niraj. In our industry, the cost for getting services can really vary depending on what type of services the individual requires. So typically speaking, if you were to put a dollar value on our services, our rates vary depending on the individual's case, and the rates start as low as $100. So first thing the individual would need to do is they would need to come see us in person, so we can do an evaluation on the person, vice versa, so they can also evaluate the company they're about to deal with to determine if we are a right fit for each other. And if we're able to help them, then we'll be able to determine the cost upfront before we initiate any sort of agreements. And that way the individual has a clear understanding as to what the process would be, how the process would work, and what the cost is at the end of the day. So they're aware either they're able to afford the solution, or is this something not for them.
Amazing. So Avani, at your company, you're currently offering free consultations for individuals who might need help with their financial obligations, their monetary difficulties, and obviously individuals who are considering maybe perhaps trying to take care of the problem themselves versus hiring a third-party professional expert such as yourself. And so when it comes to you're trying to handle it yourself versus utilizing the services of a professional expert, what's your recommendation, especially considering the fact that people may not be aware that, for example, your company offers free consultations?
Again, that's a great question, Iraq. Certainly for people who have the ability or competency to be able to deal with collection agencies and negotiate their debt down at their own level, certainly that's a great idea, and any person who's able to handle it on their own, I always advise there's no other way but to do it yourself. Having said that, negotiating debts down or dealing with collection agencies, frankly, is not for everyone, Iraq. As we all know, when you're in a financial hardship, oftentimes you're stressed out about many things in life, and that, in fact, deters your ability to think clearly and be able to negotiate the debts down in your best capacity. So that's where an individual can seek help from a credit counseling company like ourselves or anyone else in the industry, where they're able to retain the company to work on their behalf and negotiate the debts down. When we get involved, when we get retained by a client, my mandate is to work for my client, not for the creditor. So I try my utter best to negotiate the amounts down to the best possible levels where my client is able to afford in a reasonable payment form.
Amazing. So Avani, you recently expressed your concern about the recent surge of Canadians who are seeking help with bankruptcy issues, with debt relief, credit counseling services. And so, obviously, being a financial expert, what do you foresee happening as a future trend with the economy in Canada? Do you see the problem getting any better? Do you see it being any worse? How would you respond to these prognostications?
Again, that's a great question, Iraq. As you're aware that the economy and the recent recent past has not been doing so great. However, things are starting to turn around for the better. In Canada, the governor of Canada recently made some comments where they are concerned about the record number of high debt levels in Canada, consumer debt, where we are already starting to see the interest rates have already been risen twice this year, once in July and once in September by a quarter base, and that's 0.5% interest, which is substantial for many people who have overextended themselves when it comes to debt loads. That can consist from consumer debts, credit card debts, personal loans, lines of credit, all the way up to mortgages, secured loans, which is a substantial amount of debt in Canada. In the recent past that the numbers have come out, consumers have record number of mortgage debts in Canada, and that's part of the reason why the real estate economy has thrived in the recent past so much. Part of the reason is the record low interest rates that's been available to the consumers. However, the alarming part, Iraq, is that things are starting to turn around where the interest rates are starting to rise up, and people are unfortunately starting to see hardship already. I believe if the trend continues the way it's been, unfortunately things may not be so rosy for many consumers who have overextended themselves.
Amazing insights, Avani. Thank you for sharing that. And so as we wrap up today's edition of Social News Interview, is there anything else, Avani, that you would like to add?
Again, Iraq, I'd like to thank you for having us today, having me on your program today, and giving us a platform to be able to communicate to everybody, the consumers, the message that we're trying to get across, and being able to give them, again, a reminder that we're able to offer free consultation at our office. We do offer 100% money back guarantee. We don't do any formal contracts, so there's no pressure for the consumers. And one of the most important things you can do is if you're going through financial hardship in your life, you're facing some stress, the most important thing you can do is pick up the phone and make that first initial call, as I know that could be one of the most hardest things to overcome, picking up the call and making that initial contact. So as I said, we do offer free consultation. So I would urge anybody who's facing financial hardship to seek some free advice. You've got nothing to lose but your debt. So give us a call. We're available 7 days a week, Monday through Sunday. We've got toll-free numbers that are available across Canada. So we're here to help.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being a guest on today's edition of Social News Interviews.
Wonderful. I would like to thank you again, Iraq, for giving us the opportunity to come on your platform and share some insight with your audience. And I hope this can add some value for many of your audiences. Thank you again.
Awesome. And thank you again for you attending today's edition of Social News Interview. Again, my name is Iraq Christopher, and I want to thank you and hope you enjoyed today's valuable information, and we'll see you on the next edition of Social News Interviews. Have an amazing day.